Picture this. You walk into a room and immediately notice him. Not because he's the loudest or the most physically imposing, but because everyone else notices him too. There's something magnetic about his presence. Something you can't quite put your finger on. He commands attention without demanding it. People lean in when he speaks. They laugh at his jokes a little too eagerly. They seek his approval without even realizing it. You've seen this man before. Maybe he's your boss. Maybe he's that friend who always seems to get what he wants. Maybe he's the guy who dated the girl you thought was out of everyone's league. And you've probably wondered what makes him different. Here's what nobody tells you. It's not confidence. It's not charisma. It's not even intelligence. Those are just the surface-level traits everyone talks about. The real difference lies much deeper, in the shadows of human psychology, in the dark traits that high-status men have mastered, but will never openly admit to using. These are the Machiavellian principles that separate those who lead from those who follow. The uncomfortable truths about power that society pretends don't exist. Today, I'm pulling back the curtain, and what you're about to learn might disturb you, but it will change how you see the world forever. Welcome to the Machiavellian Protocol. I'm here to decode the 7 dark psychological traits that high-status men weaponize daily. These aren't the feel-good principles you'll find in mainstream self-help books. This is the raw, unfiltered reality of how power actually works. Machiavelli understood something 500 years ago that most people still refuse to accept today. Morality and power operate on different planes. The rules that govern success are not the rules we're taught in school. Now, before we dive deep into these 7 traits, I need you to do something. Drop a comment right now telling me which trait you think is most powerful. Strategic ruthlessness, emotional manipulation, or calculated charm. Just write one of those 3 in the comments. This interaction tells me you're serious about understanding power dynamics, and it helps this message reach more people who need to hear it. The algorithm rewards engagement, and I'm not above using that to spread knowledge. See, that's already a Machiavellian move right there. Using systematic incentives to achieve my objective. Now let's get into the real substance. By the end of this video, you'll understand the hidden operating system running in the minds of powerful men. You'll recognize these patterns everywhere once you know what to look for. The first trait is strategic emotional detachment. High-status men have mastered the art of caring without being attached to outcomes. This sounds contradictory, but it's actually the foundation of everything else. Think about the last time you wanted something desperately. Maybe it was a job, a relationship, or someone's approval. Remember how that desperation changed your behavior. You became more agreeable, more willing to compromise, more transparent about your needs. And what happened? You probably didn't get what you wanted. Or if you did, you got it on terms that weren't favorable to you. This is because desperation is the enemy of negotiation power. High-status men understand this at a cellular level. They've trained themselves to genuinely not need any specific outcome. Notice I said genuinely, not pretend. This isn't about faking indifference. It's about restructuring your internal reward system so that your emotional state isn't dependent on external validation. When you truly don't need something, people sense it. And paradoxically, they want to give it to you more. This works in business negotiations, romantic relationships, and social dynamics. A man who can walk away is the man who controls the frame. Machiavelli wrote that it's better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But there's a deeper principle here. It's better to be independent than needed, because the moment you need something, you've already lost. High-status men cultivate multiple options in every area of life. Multiple income streams, multiple social circles, multiple romantic prospects. Not because they're greedy or unfaithful to commitments, but because abundance creates the psychological foundation for detachment. When you have options, you make better decisions. You're not choosing from scarcity, but from genuine preference. This completely changes the energy you bring to every interaction. People can feel when you're operating from abundance versus scarcity, and they respond very differently to each. The practical application is simple but not easy. Start building redundancy in every important area of your life. Never let one job, one client, one friend, or one romantic partner become your entire source of that resource. Diversification isn't just financial advice. It's psychological warfare against your own neediness. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Strategic emotional detachment doesn't mean being cold or uncaring. In fact, the most Machiavellian move is to care deeply about people while remaining unattached to how they respond. This allows you to be genuinely generous without the hidden contract of expecting something in return. And when you give without expectation, people notice. They trust you more because they don't sense manipulation, which ironically makes them more likely to reciprocate. This is the paradox that most people never grasp. True detachment creates deeper connection than neediness ever could. The second dark trait is calculated vulnerability. This one surprises people because vulnerability is usually positioned as the opposite of Machiavellian strategy. But high-status men understand that strategic vulnerability is one of the most powerful tools for building trust and loyalty. Here's how it works. Everyone has a natural instinct to trust people who reveal weaknesses. It's a psychological shortcut our brains use. If someone shows you their underbelly, they must trust you, which means you can probably trust them. High-status men exploit this mechanism deliberately. They share carefully selected vulnerabilities at precisely calculated moments. Notice the key words there: carefully selected and precisely calculated. They're not oversharing or trauma dumping. They're strategically revealing specific weaknesses that actually make them more relatable without undermining their status. For example, a CEO might share a story about his early business failure. This makes him seem humble and human. But notice what he doesn't share. He doesn't talk about his current insecurities or active weaknesses. He doesn't reveal information that could be used against him. The vulnerability is always historical, or in domains that don't matter to his current power base. This creates the feeling of intimacy without the risk of exploitation. Machiavelli advised that a prince should appear merciful, faithful, humane, religious, and upright. The key word is appear. Calculated vulnerability is about managing perception. You want people to feel like they know the real you. But what they're actually seeing is a curated version designed to build specific responses. This isn't dishonesty. It's understanding that all human interaction involves performance to some degree. High-status men are just more conscious and intentional about their performance. The practical application requires self-awareness. You need to inventory your weaknesses and categorize them. Which ones are endearing versus which ones are disqualifying? Which ones are resolved versus which ones are ongoing? Which ones create connection versus which ones create concern? Then you strategically deploy the vulnerabilities that serve your objectives. In a job interview, you might mention that you used to struggle with public speaking, but took courses to improve. This shows self-awareness and growth while actually highlighting your initiative. In a romantic context, you might share a past relationship failure and what you learned from it. This demonstrates emotional intelligence, while subtly communicating that you've evolved. The key is that the vulnerability must be real enough to be believable, but controlled enough to be safe. And here's the advanced move that separates amateurs from masters. High-status men use vulnerability to create reciprocity. When you share something personal, social pressure compels the other person to match your level of openness. This is how you extract information while appearing to simply bond. You go first with a calculated revelation, and they follow with something potentially more useful. This is interrogation disguised as friendship, and it works because it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like connection. The third trait is selective authenticity. This builds on calculated vulnerability, but goes deeper into the architecture of identity. High-status men understand that authenticity is not a fixed state, but a strategic choice. They have multiple authentic selves and deploy the appropriate version for each context. This confuses people who believe in a singular true self. But psychology has known for decades that identity is contextual and fluid. You're a different person with your parents than with your friends. A different person at work than at home. A different person when you're tired than when you're energized. None of these versions is more real than the others. They're all authentic expressions of different aspects of your personality. High-status men simply take conscious control of this natural process. They don't let context randomly determine which self emerges. They strategically choose which aspects of their personality to amplify in each situation. With subordinates, they might emphasize authority and decisiveness. With peers, they might emphasize collaboration and humor. With superiors, they might emphasize competence and deference. Each version is genuinely them, just different facets highlighted. This is not being fake. It's being sophisticated about social dynamics. Machiavelli understood that a ruler must be like a fox and a lion. The fox to recognize traps, the lion to frighten wolves. You cannot be only one or the other. You must have the flexibility to be what the situation demands. The practical application requires developing a broader range of authentic expression. Most people have a narrow bandwidth of behavior they're comfortable with. They're always serious or always joking, always aggressive or always passive. High-status men expand their range. They become comfortable with contradiction. They can be warm and cold, generous and withholding, vulnerable and impenetrable. Not randomly, but strategically based on what serves the moment. This requires practice and self-observation. You need to notice which aspects of your personality emerge in different contexts. Then consciously practice amplifying aspects that don't come naturally. If you're naturally reserved, practice being more expressive in low-stakes situations. If you're naturally effusive, practice being more contained. The goal is to have access to the full spectrum of human behavior, so you can choose your response rather than being controlled by habit. And here's the part that makes this truly Machiavellian. Selective authenticity allows you to be all things to all people without being nothing to anyone. You give each person a real experience of you, but you control which real experience they get. This builds loyalty across diverse groups who might otherwise have conflicting values. Your conservative friends see your traditional side. Your progressive friends see your open-minded side. Both experiences are genuine, but you're managing which truth each group encounters. This is how politicians maintain broad coalitions. And it's how high-status men navigate complex social environments without making unnecessary enemies. The fourth dark trait is strategic patience combined with sudden decisiveness. This is the rhythm of power that most people completely misunderstand. They think powerful men are always aggressive and fast-moving. But the reality is much more nuanced. High-status men spend long periods in apparent inaction, gathering information and positioning pieces. Then they strike with overwhelming speed when the moment is right. This pattern is visible throughout history. Machiavelli observed that successful princes knew when to wait and when to act. Premature action wastes resources and reveals intentions. But delayed action misses opportunities and shows weakness. The skill is in reading the environment and timing your move perfectly. Most people get this backwards. They're impulsive about small things and hesitant about big things. They make quick decisions about what doesn't matter and overthink what does. High-status men reverse this pattern. They're patient and deliberate about small moves. But when a critical moment arrives, they act with absolute conviction. No hesitation, no second-guessing, no visible doubt. This creates a perception of wisdom combined with courage. People see the patience and assume thoughtfulness. Then they see the decisiveness and assume confidence. Both perceptions serve the high-status man's interests. The practical application requires developing two distinct skills. First, you need to get comfortable with strategic inaction. This means resisting the urge to do something just to feel productive. Most action is wasted motion that doesn't move you toward your objectives. High-status men are ruthlessly selective about where they invest energy. They say no to almost everything so they can say yes to the right things. This requires clarity about your actual goals versus what merely seems urgent. Second, you need to develop the capacity for rapid execution when opportunity appears. This means having systems and resources pre-positioned so you can move quickly. When the moment comes, you don't want to be scrambling to get ready. You want to already be ready and just pull the trigger. This is why high-status men invest heavily in preparation during quiet periods. They're building capabilities and relationships they might need later. So when opportunity knocks, they can answer immediately. There's a famous Machiavelli quote about fortune favoring the bold, but the full context is more interesting. He says fortune is like a river that floods, but wise men build dams and channels during calm weather. The boldness isn't reckless. It's prepared audacity. And here's the psychological edge this creates. When you combine long patience with sudden action, you become unpredictable. People can't read your patterns or anticipate your moves. This keeps them off balance and reactive to you rather than proactive against you. Unpredictability is a form of power because it forces others to prepare for multiple scenarios, which dilutes their focus and resources. Meanwhile, you know exactly what you're doing and when you'll do it. Information asymmetry is always an advantage. The fifth trait is controlled generosity. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive dark trait because generosity seems virtuous and un-Machiavellian. But high-status men understand that strategic giving is one of the most effective forms of social control. The key is in how, when, and to whom you're generous. Random or excessive generosity creates entitlement and dependency. It actually lowers your status because it signals that you're trying to buy affection. Controlled generosity, by contrast, creates loyalty and obligation while maintaining your position. Here's the framework. High-status men are generous in ways that are visible, memorable, and create clear reciprocity. They're not generous in ways that are expected, invisible, or taken for granted. For example, paying for dinner every time becomes expected and loses impact. But unexpectedly covering a significant expense when someone is struggling creates lasting gratitude. The difference is strategic timing and proportionality. Machiavelli wrote that benefits should be given little by little so they are better enjoyed. But injuries should be done all at once so they are less felt. This asymmetry in how you distribute positive and negative actions is crucial. When you help someone, make it memorable and specific. When you must harm someone's interests, do it quickly and completely. The practical application requires keeping a mental ledger of social capital. You need to track who owes you, who you owe, and what the exchange rate is. This sounds transactional, and it is. But all relationships have transactional elements, whether we acknowledge them or not. High-status men simply make this explicit in their own minds. They know that generosity without reciprocity is exploitation. So they're generous to people who have the capacity and inclination to reciprocate. And they're strategically unavailable to people who only take. This doesn't mean being calculating in a cold way. It means being intentional about where you invest your limited resources of time, money, and energy. You can't help everyone, so you help the people where your help will create the most value, both for them and for your network. There's also a deeper layer to controlled generosity. When you help someone at a critical moment, you become part of their success story. They will always remember that you were there when it mattered. This creates a bond that goes beyond simple reciprocity. It becomes identity-level loyalty. High-status men engineer these moments when possible. They position themselves to be the helper during someone's crisis or breakthrough, not opportunistically, but by being present and capable when others need support. This is why powerful men often mentor rising talent. It's not pure altruism. It's an investment in future allies who will remember who helped them climb. And here's the final edge of controlled generosity. It allows you to be selective about obligations. When you're generous strategically, you can also be unavailable strategically without seeming selfish. You've already established that you're a giving person through your visible acts of generosity. So when you say no, people assume you have good reasons. They don't question your character because they've seen evidence of your generosity. This is reputation management through strategic action. The sixth dark trait is emotional opacity. High-status men have mastered the ability to conceal their true emotional state while reading others with precision. This creates a fundamental asymmetry in every interaction. They know how you feel, but you don't know how they feel. This is an enormous advantage in negotiation, conflict, and relationship dynamics. When your emotions are transparent, you're giving away information about your priorities, fears, and limits. People can use this against you, even unconsciously. When your emotions are opaque, others must guess at your state. This uncertainty makes them cautious and more likely to offer concessions. Machiavelli advised that a prince should be a great pretender and dissembler. Men are so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that the deceiver will always find someone ready to be deceived. A key is controlling what people see, not lying about emotions, but simply not displaying them reflexively. Most people are emotional broadcasters. Their face, voice, and body language constantly transmit their internal state. This is natural, but strategically disadvantageous. High-status men interrupt this automatic broadcast. They create a buffer between feeling and expression. They feel emotions fully, but choose whether and how to display them. The practical application starts with developing emotional awareness. You can't control what you don't notice. So the first step is becoming conscious of your emotional reactions as they happen. Notice the physical sensations, the thoughts, the impulses. Then practice the pause between stimulus and response. Someone says something provocative. You feel anger rising. Instead of immediately reacting, you observe the anger. You feel it in your body, but don't let it control your face or voice. This takes practice, but it's a learnable skill. The second layer is learning to display emotion strategically. Sometimes showing anger is useful. Sometimes showing vulnerability is useful. The key is that it's a choice, not a reflex. You're using emotional display as a tool, rather than being used by your emotions. This is not suppression, which is unhealthy. It's conscious expression, which is powerful. And here's where it gets really Machiavellian. While you're controlling your own emotional display, you're simultaneously reading others. You're watching their micro-expressions, listening to their tone, noticing their body language. You're gathering data about their true state while revealing nothing about yours. This information asymmetry is the foundation of psychological dominance. In a negotiation, if you can see that the other person is anxious, but they can't see that you're equally anxious, you have the advantage. You can press harder because you know they're close to breaking. They can't press you because they don't know your limits. In a relationship, if you can read your partner's insecurity, but they can't read yours, you control the frame. Not through manipulation, but through simple information advantage. High-status men also use strategic emotional displays to test others. They might show anger to see who flinches and who stands firm. They might show vulnerability to see who offers support and who exploits weakness. These are calibration tools for understanding who they're dealing with. The responses tell them everything they need to know about someone's character and reliability. The seventh and final dark trait is ruthless priority management. This is the trait that makes all the others possible. High-status men are absolutely clear about their hierarchy of values and goals, and they're willing to sacrifice anything that doesn't serve their top priorities. This sounds simple, but most people completely fail at this. They say family is their priority, but work 80 hours a week. They say health is important, but never exercise. They say they want success, but won't make uncomfortable choices. High-status men have eliminated this gap between stated values and actual behavior. They've done the hard work of getting brutally honest about what they actually care about. Then they've organized their entire life around those priorities. Everything else gets ruthlessly cut or minimized. Machiavelli observed that the prince who wants to maintain his state is often forced to act against faith, charity, and humanity. This isn't advocating immorality. It's recognizing that you cannot optimize for everything. Every choice involves trade-offs. High-status men are conscious about which trade-offs they're making. They don't pretend they can have it all. They choose their priorities and accept the costs. The practical application requires a priority audit. List everything you say is important to you. Then look at your calendar and bank statement. Those show your actual priorities. If there's a mismatch, you have two choices. Change your behavior to match your stated values, or change your stated values to match your actual behavior. Both are valid, but the gap between them is where self-deception lives. High-status men close this gap. Once you have clarity on priorities, the next step is systematic elimination. You need to identify everything in your life that doesn't serve your top 3 priorities. Then you need to remove, delegate, or minimize those things. This is where ruthlessness comes in. You'll have to disappoint people. You'll have to say no to good opportunities because they're not great opportunities. You'll have to let relationships fade that don't serve your mission. This feels harsh, but it's actually respectful. It's better to be honestly unavailable than to be present but resentful. High-status men would rather have a small number of deep commitments than a large number of shallow ones. Quality over quantity applies to everything. And here's the final insight about ruthless priority management. It's not selfish, it's strategic. When you're clear about your priorities and organized around them, you're actually more valuable to others. You can give more to the people and projects that matter because you're not diluted across 100 mediocre commitments. Your focus creates excellence. Your excellence creates value. Your value creates status. This is the virtuous cycle that high-status men ride. They're not trying to be everything to everyone. They're trying to be exceptional at what matters. And they're willing to be nothing to people who don't align with that mission. So there you have it. The 7 dark traits that high-status men use but never openly discuss. Strategic emotional detachment that creates abundance mentality. Calculated vulnerability that builds trust while maintaining safety. Selective authenticity that allows you to be all things without being nothing. Strategic patience combined with sudden decisiveness that creates unpredictability. Controlled generosity that builds loyalty without creating entitlement. Emotional opacity that creates information asymmetry. And ruthless priority management that makes everything else possible. These aren't comfortable truths. They don't fit the narrative we're sold about success being purely about hard work and good intentions. But Machiavelli understood something that remains true 5 centuries later. The world is not governed by what we wish were true. It's governed by what actually works. High-status men have accepted this reality. They've stopped fighting against human nature and started working with it. They've stopped pretending that power follows different rules than everything else in nature. And they've developed these dark traits not because they're evil, but because they're effective. Now you have a choice. You can reject this information because it makes you uncomfortable. You can pretend that status and power are distributed fairly based on merit and kindness. Or you can accept the game as it actually exists and decide how you want to play. Understanding these traits doesn't mean you have to use all of them. But not understanding them means you'll be perpetually confused about why certain people succeed while others don't. Knowledge is neutral. It's what you do with it that carries moral weight. I've given you the Machiavellian protocol. What you build with it is up to you. If this resonated with you, leave a comment sharing which trait you recognized in someone you know. And subscribe, because we're going much deeper into the psychology of power in upcoming videos. The rabbit hole goes far deeper than most people imagine. If you're ready to take these strategies beyond theory, check the pinned comment. The link I left there is the next step to becoming truly untouchable.